Hello, my name is Toby from Artmaster Studio and welcome to How to Paint a French Napoleonic Guard Chasseur a Cheval. In this video I'm going to be undercoating, dry brushing and preparing the figure for the first stage of highlighting. There will be a list of the colours used in the description below. So I'm going to start off with the horsehair and the fur hat that he's wearing. These areas need to be dry brushed because they're quite textured, and it's an easy, effective way to pick out the highlights on those particular areas. So for this I'm going to be using a colour called Vallejo Dark Grey. Now as I'm dry brushing, I don't need to water the paint down. It needs to be fairly thick, and I'm going to be using a large brush for this. This is kind of a large tatty brush. You don't have to have a perfect brush to do this. Now as you can see, just getting a bit of paint on the end, but it's not good enough to just put that straight on the figure. So what we need to do is just wipe off as much of the excess paint as necessary until it's fairly dry. Then we can just use a downward motion over the areas we want to dry brush. Now as you can see, this is starting to pick out the raised areas that we want to catch with the paint. Now you can highlight these areas as you would normally, but dry brushing is just a quick and easy, effective way of doing it. Okay, so I think that's about done for that. Now I'm just using plain tap water to wash my brush. I've got a small jar for that, and I'm going to use some plain kitchen roll to dry the brush after I've given it a waggle in my water. Now the brush has to be considerably dry if we're going to continue to do dry brushing. Now I want to give those areas I've just dry brushed an extra highlight, so I'm going to use a lighter colour this time, Vallejo London Grey. Always remember to give your paints a good shake before squeezing them out. If you leave a paint standing for too long, or if it's a new paint, it's likely to separate inside the bottle and it's not going to come out right. So again, just putting a small amount on the end of your brush, getting the excess off on your palette. This time we're not going to press as hard, and we're only trying to catch the real areas where the sun or the light is going to be hitting most. So that's really just the top areas of the towel here. We're not going to go underneath or anything. And this just gives the impression of a natural highlight. And it's always important to imagine where the light would be coming from on a model. For example, underneath his jacket there, you're not going to get much light hitting under there, so it's not likely that that should be highlighted. Okay, so now we're satisfied with the horsehair and the fur on the jacket and hat. We're going to move on to undercoating the horseflesh. Now switching brushes now, I'm moving to a Red Sable Kolinsky Zero brush. You can use larger brushes than this. I tend to not really like too large brushes for undercoating because I like to keep it as neat as possible. I'm going to be using Vallejo Dark Rust. This is a Panzer Aces colour, they have 3 different ranges of paints. They have model colour, Panzer Aces and game colour. Right, so this time I'm going to put some in the centre area of my palette, and if I feel it necessary I'll add a tiny amount of water to it, just to make sure it's silky smooth and that I'm not going to get any lumps when I'm undercoating. I'm just using a knackered out brush to do that. No point using a detailed brush that you use for highlighting to mix your paints. It's just going to ruin them. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm just going to dip my brush in and start undercoating. Now you can be a little bit messy with this stage because obviously none of the rest of the figure is painted yet. So if you do make any mistakes, don't worry too much, because you're just going to be painting over the other areas later on. Try and cover all of the black, even in the recesses, underneath the horse, in the cracks and crevices. I'm going to leave the legs from the knees down. This will be highlighted later on. You can go all the way down to the hooves if you like with the brown. It's not necessary on all horses to just leave the bottoms of the legs black. It's perfectly natural for horses to have brown manes and tails and completely brown legs. It just depends on what type of horse it is. A good idea is to buy a horse book for horse enthusiasts, as they tend to have lots of photos and descriptions of the different types of horses. And you can get a lot of inspiration from books like that on how to get your horses looking a bit more creative. You do have to remember though that not everyone would have had, for example, a white horse or a grey horse. It's important to research the unit that you're painting. More often than not, in the Napoleonic Wars, a musician would be riding on a grey horse. So that'll make him sort of stand out from the rest of the unit. And the officers of that particular unit would probably be on, they could be on a brown horse, but as well they could be on a slightly rarer horse, a light brown or even white horse. And some horses in particular units would have all been the same colour. It would have had to have been a uniform type of horse. For instance, a unit may all have to have black horses or a particular type of brown. So this is our first HD how to paint video. I encourage you to watch it in HD. Remember to click on the icon if it's not in HD and change it to HD. I suggest that's the best viewing experience you're going to get, and it will show the detail much better. Alright, so I think that's about all of the horseflesh base coated. Now we're going to move on. We're going to undercoat the trousers. For this I'm going to use Vallejo Light Mud. This is again a Panzer Aces colour. Now this is the trousers are going to be kind of an off-white or a champagne colour if you will. This is a really nice base coat if you want to create a warm white rather than a cold white. Cold whites often start from a grey base, and warm whites start from a cream or a more of a browny undercoat and build up to white. Again, just adding a little bit of water to my paint just to get that silkier texture. Be careful not to add too much water because that will thin your paint too much and make it run into the creases where you don't necessarily want it. So just as we did the horseflesh, just trying to be as neat as possible, but again, don't worry too much if you do go over the edges, because we will be able to touch that up later. Alright, so that's that about done. Now we'll move on to undercoating the jackets. Now I'm going to start with the green. This is going to be Vallejo Black Green. This is a model colour black green. But I'm not going to use this on its own. I'm going to actually darken it down slightly. Just by adding some black into it, because if I use this as a base coat, it's likely that the highlights will become too light for the colour that I want. So I'm going to show you how I mix this. You can use any black, doesn't matter what brand it is, as long as it's a matte black. Probably squeeze just under 50% of the black in there, so there's probably about a 60-40 mix. Get your knackered out brush and give it a good mix with some water. I think that's probably about right. You could go slightly darker than that. Right, so this green is not only going to be for the inner jacket, but it's going to be used on the saddle cloth and the blanket roll as well. So you want to paint the arms on this guy and the collar. The cuffs though will be red, so we're not going to do that. Just check if there's any showing on the other sleeve. No, that's underneath his jacket there. So now we're going to move on to the saddle cloth. It's got a nice thick edging to it, so that's nice. We'll just leave that for now. That's going to be an orange colour later on. Now we're also going to paint the little square thing hanging off here above the scabbard. This is going to have some nice decoration on it and nice detailing. The plume will have the bottom half as green and the tip will be in red. Alright, so that's that about undercoated. I think we've got everything there. Give the brush a good wash. Then we'll move on to the red. Now I'm going to be using Vallejo Black Red. This is a model colour. Give it a good shake. Add a tiny bit of water. Just dip your brush in the water and it will hold a few droplets on it. No need to use a pipette or anything. In fact, if you use a pipette, you're probably more likely to put too much water in. But I guess it's whatever you feel comfortable doing. Okay, so this red is going to be used on the cuffs, the tip of the plume, just about a third of the plume, I would say. The outer jacket will be in this colour. Not the lace though, you have to remember to leave the lace, which will be a nice orange colour again. A little bit of the cuff showing under there. Now if you can see, he's wearing a sort of a barrel sash around his waist. Now that's going to be segmented into red and green. And it's actually cast on, so you don't have to separate those yourself. So it'll be like red, green, red, green, red, green in that pattern. The little tongue on the hat here will be red as well. There is some piping on it, but we can sort that out later. Okay, so that's looking good. Now I'm going to move on to the wood and hair. I'm going to use the same colour for this to save time. I'm using German Camo Black Brown. This is a Panzer Aces Vallejo. So this is just going to be on the wood on the musket. The silver barrel is on top all the way down, and there are rings around it as well, so make sure you don't paint those. Paint the moustache, any hair that's showing at the back. Okay. I'm going to move on to the face. Okay, so for this I'm going to use Panzer Aces Shadow's Flesh. This is a nice red-brown base coat for your flesh. Now he's wearing gloves, so we're only going to be painting the face. Don't forget the ears, it's easy to do that. Just see one tucked behind these chin scales there. Okay, so now we're going to base coat the white areas. I'm going to take some Vallejo Light Grey for this. So this is going to be that cold white that I was telling you about before. Just add some water to that. Alright, so we're going to paint these gloves in this colour. And his strap around his body will be in this colour as well. It's a nice white leather strap. And there's just another one underneath. And one over the cartridge box at the back. Now we're going to paint some horse markings on the legs of the horse. Some white markings. These will just be down towards the hooves, slightly up the leg. You can go as far up the leg as you want, up to the knees. Again, refer to a horse book or some images from Google to give you a general idea of how these go. You don't have to do them on all the legs, you can just do as many as you like, or none at all. I think I'm going to leave it at 2. Sometimes they have markings on their face as well, but there's lots of straps on this face, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Now the hooves of the horse will be in brown. Now I like to use Vallejo Burnt Umber for this. Okay, so now we're going to undercoat the orange areas that need undercoating anyway. We're going to use a colour called Light Rust. Now this is quite dark for what the final highlight's going to be, but I want to give it 2 highlights, so I'm needing to start at fairly dark. Not too dark though, because you don't want too much contrast. So this is going to be on the edge of the saddle cloth. Remember, if you find this video useful, please give it a like and a comment. Be sure to subscribe for more videos in the future. Do some piping around the edge of the blanket roll there. Again, don't worry about being too neat because we're just going to tidy this up later. And we'll do some piping around this. Alright, so we're nearly ready to move on to the exciting bit, which is highlighting. Just undercoat the lace here. The thinner areas of lace on the front of the jacket don't need to undercoat that, so just leave that as it is. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the silver. I'm going to be using a Games Workshop colour here, Boltgun metal, but you can get the equivalent colour of this in Vallejo. I believe it's from the game colour range. Now if you want to water it down, just scoop some into your palette. And add some water that way. So I'm just painting this on the barrel of the gun and the sword. And the stirrups. It's always easy to forget these are here. Alright, so that's about done for that. And the last thing we'll undercoat will be the underneath of the saddlecloth where it's folded over here. I'm just going to use the undercoat we used on the white for that. It's going to be have a nice stripy pattern to that. And there's a couple of straps I missed here as well. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this part of the tutorial, and I hope you come back for part 2 when we can start highlighting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.